Welcome to our third week as we continue to dig deeper into the experience of forgiveness. We've been sort of introduced to the thought of Bishop Tutu as he has shared the meaning of having the character of Ubuntu, a word in his native language which is difficult to translate into a single English word. We've compared Ubuntu to the description of a person who is committed to the life of being forgiven and forgiving. I shared the story of the mystery of the dramatic change of my friend who all of a sudden received the message in worship that she was loved over against the message she had always heard before, that she was judged. Now, this week we're going to consider Ubuntu and being forgiven as the central tenet of Jesus' teaching and the core of his own relationship with every human being. It's helpful to me to turn to the Gospel according to Matthew. As we've looked at it before, Matthew was composed and written as a case statement to the Jewish community to accept Jesus as the Messiah, the one through whom God's love was revealed. Now, the Gospel according to Matthew presents the life and teachings of Jesus with two interesting bookends. Now, Matthew starts with the study we had on the Beatitudes. And the Gospel quotes Jesus' reference to Leviticus 19:18. And you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Leviticus 19:18. This teaching was consistent with the lifestyle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The ethic of revenge, retaliation, and vindictiveness. Now, this ethic was not only an ethic of old, it prevails today in more than one major religion in the world and is certainly the dominant ethos in the recent months of the Israeli-Hamas struggle in the Near East. We're seeing that when both sides of a conflict are driven by this ethic, all hell breaks loose. The reason I use this phrase referring to hell is that a root definition of hell is separation. Go to hell literally means be separated from me. You see, this provides the foundation for international warfare and interpersonal warfare. And this kind of international and interpersonal warfare justifies hatred for the enemy with the ultimate goal of destroying the enemy. You know, we're watching this play out in our daily news today in human history. But you know something? All of us have witnessed this play out in interpersonal relationships within communities and within families. Now, the Gospel of Matthew, the narrative of Jesus' teaching, begins with this bookend. However, I say to you, love your enemies. From this point on, Matthew presents Jesus as one who loved his enemies as well as his neighbors, offering an alternative, a new way to live, in place of centuries of proclamation and teaching that revenge, retaliation, and vindictiveness was right and justified by God. Jesus said, "Whoops, no, the new way I'm calling you to live is to forgive." Included after the discussion of loving your enemies in the instruction of how to pray. Accepting forgiveness from God and being agents of forgiveness to others, this new teaching was a radical departure of what until then had been understood as God's will and way. Revenge, vindictiveness, retaliation, and destruction. Now that's the first bookend, A New Way to Live. The final bookend in Matthew's narrative was the cross, Jesus' journey to death. And Jesus proclaimed, "God, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." You see, Jesus, at the end of his life, preached what he had practiced throughout his ministry. You know, some people practice what you preach. Other people preach what they practice, and Jesus was the author of that understanding. Jesus lived his life governed by being forgiven and forgiving. Ubuntu is a way to live in relationship to each other as humans. For if there's going to be peace on earth, goodwill among all, that's the message of God's angels, God's messengers to the shepherds. The only way to this peace is the experience of being forgiven and forgiving. Between these bookends, Jesus' life and teaching on forgiveness was clear. Most clear when he was asked, "How many times do you forgive, Jesus? This is ridiculous stuff you're trying to get us to do." But Jesus' message on forgiveness was without hesitation or without diversion. How often? Jesus said 70 times 70. You know what that means in Hebrew numerology? 70 times 70 is infinity. There is no limitation on the commitment to be forgiven and forgiving. There is no limitation. No one is excluded from being forgiven and forgiving. Now, this is certainly the highest calling in our journey of faith. This is the way Jesus lived. This calling is over against the natural tendencies we have to be revengeful. It comes in a lot of forms, these natural invitations that we have. You see, sometimes it's a calling in society where we have competition. And this competition declares that the winner is more worthy than the loser. It's the calling of a world in which history has heralded the acquisition of power and control as proof that good prevails over evil. It's the calling of many religions of the world that the proof that God is on the side of that religion is the number of adherents who are under the control of religious authorities. These are the callings of society, of culture, and the world. You see, Jesus stood over against what his tradition had taught and what all of us have been taught. Jesus stood over that with the high calling of Ubuntu, that reconciliation, restoration, acceptance, and grace are the divine avenues to peace on earth, goodwill among men, among all. And Jesus said, no, 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 no. There is a better way. That indeed, instead of revenge, retaliation, and vindication, the pathway of reconciliation, restoration, acceptance, and grace are the avenues to peace on earth, goodwill among all. You see, it's clear when we take Jesus' life and teaching seriously, the practice of being forgiven and forgiving is the practice to which all of us have been called by Jesus from bookend to bookend and in between his life and teaching. The high calling of Jesus is the calling to Ubuntu. Some things to think about and talk about. What is so attractive about the ethic of hate, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? What are the primary sources which advocate for the ethic of hate in 2024? And finally, what's your response to the understanding that the practice of being forgiven and forgiving is the key to peace on earth, goodwill among all? Thank you for being a part of our journey.